we have seen very profound insights hitherto. In the vast universe that God created, there's a special place for man. Man is at the center. Even though man is not such a lofty creation, after all, we're lowly creations. In the lowly world, there's the angels and the upper realms and the upper spheres and the upper dimensions. Nevertheless, the Almighty decided to endow man with the ability to determine the fate of all of created existence. Man has the power. Man has the lever. Man is created in the image of God. Man's actions ripple through all of created existence. And that's why when man is created, the verse describes the creation of man. God blew into his nostrils the soul of life. Vayihi ha'adam, and man became lenefesh chaya, to the nefesh, to the soul, to the spirit of life. What's the definition of man? Man is the soul. Now, what does that mean? Just as the soul determines what the body does, the soul is the governing architecture, the governing apparatus of the collective of man, so too, in all of created existence, in all of the worlds, in all of the realms, in all of the universes, in all of the dimensions, man is the soul. Man determines what happens not only to them, but to all of created existence. Now, he's going to proceed, the Nefesh HaChaim, with trying to explain the mechanism, the structure of how this works. How can man, in a lowly spiritual world, how can man serve as the catalyst, as the impetus, as the driving force behind all of created existence? So the first thing we have to know is that we tend to think of ourselves as a body. Maybe we have a soul as well, but the soul is almost like a feature within our body. But certainly we know that man is a hybrid, a fusion of opposites. And Scripture tells us, Psalms 139, you formed me first and last, front and back. Is man first or last, front or back, highest or lowest? The answer is both. When it comes to man's body, he's at the end of the chain. He's a very lowly existence. But of course, that is not the totality of man. God blew into his nostrils the soul of life. And what's the status of the soul? Is it first or last? Is it top or bottom? When it comes to the soul, man is all the way at the very top, above everything else in God's creation, above all the worlds, above all the dimensions, above all the realms. And because the soul is at the top, we've seen this before, all of created existence, the upper spheres, the lower spheres, the myriads of levels, they are all interconnected. The fancy Kabbalistic terminology, they are concatenated. There's a linkage between all the different realms. And if something happens on a higher realm, it's going to ripple through all the lower realms below it. So, just to take an example, we have a body and a soul. The soul is, of course, higher than the body. So what the soul does ripples through the body. But imagine 1,000,000 levels, 1,000,000 dimensions, endless myriads of dimensions. And they're all interconnected, almost like links on a chain. And every higher level serves almost as the soul, as it were, of the level below it. And each action, each movement on a higher level ripples through the lower level. Maybe an example to explain this. If a person is wearing a glove and the person clenches his hand into a fist, the glove also clenches into a fist. But it's not the glove that moved, it's the hand inside the glove that moved, and that caused the glove itself to move. But imagine a man wearing not one glove, but 2 or 5. They don't want to pay the baggage fees, so they come onto the plane and they're wearing all their clothing for the whole trip. So the man's wearing 12 gloves. The man clenches his fist and all the gloves move. Why? Because the glove that's closest to the fist, that moves, and that pushes the one that's next to it, and so on. The one that's next to it, the one that's next to it, the one that's next to it, until all of them are clenched. The upper level is the soul for the level below it. What's the highest dimension, the highest creation, the highest realm? That's the human soul. It's the soul of souls. And just as every dimension is the soul, is the actualizer, is the catalyst for the dimension below it, what's the soul of souls? That is the soul of man. The soul of man is so high, is so lofty, it's all the way on the top, and therefore what it does determines what happens in all the dimensions below it. Again, that verse. God blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a Nefesh HaChaim, the soul of life, not just the soul of their own life, but of all the worlds, of all the created existence. Man is their soul, man is their catalyst, man is the one who determines their fate. Man is the highest soul. More specifically, man's soul is the highest soul. Man's body is much lower. And therefore, everything that's below the human soul, in this chain, in this interconnected concatenation, everything is impacted by the movement, by the decisions, by the actions of the human soul. And that's why our choices, our decisions, human choices, human decisions are so important. Because the root of man, the soul of man is so lofty. It's loftier than anything else. It's more primary than anything else in created existence. And whatever happens to it, whatever it does, affects every level below it, all of those millions, billions, myriads of levels. This is the idea that we sort of saw already last time. But we're going to refine it. The idea needs further clarification. We're learning about the importance of the human and the human soul as it relates to all of created existence. God blew into his nostril the soul of life, and all of life, all of created existence is determined, what happens to it is determined by the soul of man. So we would define the linkage between the human soul and the rest of created existence as the soul to the body. Our soul is the soul of souls of all of the rest of created existence. It's the highest on the totem pole. And whatever happens with the soul ripples through all the myriads of levels. But is it exactly like the linkage of body and soul? What's the nature of the bond between our soul and the rest of created existence? So if you read the verse just simply, you would say, well, we're the soul of life. We're the soul of everything. And therefore everything else compared to our soul is like a body. But you can't say it's exactly like the relationship of soul and body. If you think about the soul and body, just let's take a person. Person has a body, person has a soul. This is the fusion of opposites that exists within man. And there are two partners, if you will. There's the senior partner, that's the soul. There's the junior partner, that's the body. But the body, that's the vessel, that's the vehicle for the soul. The body is critical, is indispensable for the soul. If the soul wants to do something, it can only do something via the vehicle of the body. So we have this philosophical comparison. And we say, just as the soul is the soul for the body, so too our soul is the soul for all of created existence. Is it exactly like body and soul? We think of the body as a vehicle for the soul. You can't say that all the realms and all the worlds and all the dimensions and all the different elements of created existence, it's all like a body for the soul. It's all like a vehicle for the soul of man. That's preposterous. Accordingly, we can get a further refinement of the mechanism by which man's soul, can manipulate, can direct, can influence, can determine the fate of all the worlds, of all the realms, of all the dimensions. It's a little bit different. Man's relationship, man's soul's relationship to the rest of created existence, it's not exactly like the soul to a body. It's more like a microcosm to a macrocosm. And he explains, after God created all of the universes, all the way at the end of Genesis, God created man. Man is the last of the creations of Genesis. It's a wondrous creation that incorporates within it everything else. Everything else that preceded man in Genesis is incorporated within man. All of the forces, all of the elements, all of the lights, all of the dimensions, the entire framework and structure of all the other creations are incorporated in the last creation of man. Chapter 1 of Genesis, we read a perplexing verse. It's day 6 of Genesis. Na'aseh Adam, let us create man. Well, God created man, not us. So we're trying to figure out, what does it mean, let us create man? Here's a novel interpretation. Us, God is speaking to all of the realms, to all of the dimensions, to all of created existence. Let us, all of created existence up to that point, contribute towards the creation of man. Because everything that exists in all of the rest of created existence has a parallel, has a microcosm within man. All of Genesis up to the creation of man is subsumed in a microcosm within man. Let everything that has been created hitherto in Genesis, let this all coalesce within this last creation, the creation of man. This is going to be how we're going to understand the mechanism by which man is going to influence all of created existence. But before we get to there, there's a very important sidebar. The book is designed as the main text, and then interspersed within the book are all these fascinating sidebars. And he has a very fascinating sidebar about the change between Adam before his sin to Adam after his sin. There's this creation. It's this wondrous microcosm, man, that incorporates all the forces, all the dimensions, all the realms, all the universes, all the elements, all the dimensions of all the worlds. Man, the makeup of man, The makeup of this microcosm is very different before Adam's sin and after Adam's sin. Prior to Adam's sin, only the realms, the dimensions, the forces of holiness, of purity were incorporated within man. There's no other forces present. After Adam sinned, after he consumed from the forbidden fruit, from the tree of knowledge, good and evil, thenceforth, good and evil are now both featured within the microcosm within man. There's a interweaving, intermixing, intermingling within man after his sin. And just as they became incorporated, intermingled within man, man's the microcosm. And what happens in the microcosm happens in the macrocosm. So just as good and evil are now interspersed, intermixed within man, they also became incorporated, intermingled in all the realms. The relationship between the human soul, and the rest of created existence, it's not exactly like a body and soul. It's like a microcosm and a macrocosm. This is the mechanism by which man can influence everything else in creation. Whatever happens in the microcosm determines what happens in the macrocosm. If within man, as a result of the sin, there became an admixture of purity and impurity, of holiness and its opposite, that will also affect everything else in the macrocosm, everything else below it in the concatenation. So Adam's sin created corruption for himself. It created a cloudiness within him and his realm, but it created a parallel cloudiness, a parallel confusion, a parallel admixture in all of created existence. So Adam before his sin and Adam after his sin are very different beings. And the way he clarifies this point is by the most essential superpower of Adam, and that's free will. Prior to Adam's sin, he had free will. He could direct himself in whichever way he wanted, to do good or, God forbid, do the opposite. And we know for sure that Adam had free will because he exercised it. He sinned, so he must have had the ability to sin. But what is the nature of Adam's free will before and after? Prior to his sin, he only incorporated within himself the microcosm of good. He had no forces within pulling him, directing him, seducing him, nudging him towards evil. He was only comprised of forces of good, of holiness, of purity. He was wondrously straight and refined and purified without any admixture, without any inclination to the other side. All of the other forces, the evil forces, were all outside of him. They weren't incorporated within him. So sure, he had free will to sin, but it's not the way we think of free will. His free will to sin is exactly equivalent to our free will to jump into a raging fire. You could do it. You have the ability to do it. You're just not inclined at all to do it. You're not drawn to it. There's nothing within you pulling you to do it. The only way Adam could have sinned, the nature of Adam's free will before his sin, was a result of the serpent, an external force that seduced him. That is the state of Adam. That is the state of Adam's free will before his sin. But now, post the sin, there's this admixture, there's this interweaving, a commingling of different forces. The good and the bad, the holy and the pure, with the unholy, with the impure. It's all operating within Adam, within man. So you don't need anymore an external force compelling man to sin. The person himself, due to his newfound composition of good and bad, feels internal impulses in both directions. Man can be drawn to sin not because they want to jump in the fire, but because they're drawn to it. They have an internal inclination to it. That's all the result of the consumption from the tree of knowledge, good and evil. There is now a connection, a commingling within himself and within the worlds that he serves as the microcosm to. There's now a commingling of good and bad. The results are far-reaching. After Adam's sin, everything that we do, it's a byproduct of this mixture. You have people, you may be shocked to learn, that sometimes do good and sometimes do bad. Well, how's that possible? Are you good or are you bad? Well, you're both. Are you drawn to good or are you drawn to bad? You're drawn to both. Everyone seems to be a mixed bag because we are mixed. Both forces are compelling from within in both directions. It's even more granular. Suppose a man does good. They do a mitzvah, something pure, something holy, something that's good. That's like what Adam before his sin was drawn to. Even when a person does good, it's basically impossible for it to be 100% pristinely good. It's basically impossible that there shouldn't be some element, some side, some perspective, some facet, some dimension that comes from the other side, from the evil part of the duality operating within man. Just as it's almost impossible to do something entirely good, it's almost impossible to do something entirely bad, even when a person does a sin. There may be some thought that they have, some justification that they have, some good perspective within the sin. It's very hard to be totally good or totally evil. It's now a mix. It's a hodgepodge, a commingling. You can have an entirely righteous person who never did even a single sin in their entire life, never said even one word that's not appropriate. It's unimaginably righteous. But if you were to dissect every single action and try to identify every component of that action, the devotion, the desire, the motivation, the excitement, if you were to scrutinize, put a magnifying glass on every single mitzvah, it's almost impossible that there should be even one mitzvah that's not lacking anything, that there's no bubbling, there's no manifestation of any part of what Adam acquired after his sin. And that's why the verse tells us in Proverbs chapter 7, there's no tzaddik, there's no righteous person in the land that does good and does not sin. Even if they do only good, an action is more than just a single binary thing. Within the action, there's so many different elements and dimensions. And almost invariably, there's something lacking even within the mitzvah. Whatever we do is influenced by who we are. And who we are is something which changed since Adam's sin. And the true measure of a person and the true measure of a person's deeds can only be determined by God. And that's why the heavenly tribunal, it's almost endless calculations of every deed, of every word, of every thought. Every detail, and every detail of every detail, of every thought, of every word, of every deed is determined by an infinitely granular assessment in the heavenly tribunal. It's almost impossible to have a completely perfect deed once it's scrutinized by heaven. He tells us as well that this result of Adam's sin was the state of humanity until the Sinai revelation. God tore apart the heavens and appeared to the whole nation. And something very important and dramatic happened at Sinai. The influence of the sin of Adam, the admixture of good and bad, was rectified at Sinai. The influence of the bad was purged from the nation at Sinai. At Sinai, the nation was restored to the pristine state of Adam before his sin. They were comprised only of good forces. They were a microcosm for only the good. And that lasted not very long. Adam lasted in his pristine state for a couple of hours. The nation lasted in their pristine state for almost 40 days. The sin of the golden calf is a reenactment of the sin of Adam. Just as with the sin of Adam, there was nothing within compelling him to sin, the sin of the golden calf was a byproduct of the Satan, the Satan, coming not from within, but rather from without, and creating confusion from without. Because once Sinai happened, the sin of Adam was purged from within the nation. There's no longer any forces of evil squatting within them. It was banished. It was purged. And the only way for the nation to sin was to be influenced from without by something akin to the serpent of yore. But like Adam, the nation sinned. And like Adam, the aftermath of this sin caused the nation to be changed. And via the golden calf, once again, we have the result of the tree of knowledge, good and evil. The forces of evil were mixed within them. And he adds a few more points here. Very interesting. Prior to Adam's sin, God told him, B'yom ha'chacham mimenu, the day that you eat from this tree, most tamus, you will surely die. It doesn't say you will die, it means you will surely die, you'll be condemned to die. Now we typically read that as a punishment. You will be punished. It's much more subtle than that. God is describing the consequences of this sin. When you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will become a mixture of good and evil. Both of them will now operate within this microcosm. You will have the venom of the serpent coursing within you. It's going to fundamentally change your physiology. And that will necessitate that you die. Not as a punishment, not as a curse, but rather the only way to fix it, to rectify, to separate once again the good from the evil, it's only via death. And therefore you will condemn yourself to need to necessarily need to die, because that will be the only way to reverse what you did. It's a very profound insight. Death is not a curse, it's not a punishment. It's just a consequence, but it's actually also a blessing. The only way that man, post the sin of Adam, can achieve cleansing and perfection, it's only when they die and they're buried and they decompose. That's a process of separating, of purging, of reversing the sin of Adam from within them. Accordingly, death and its aftermath are a necessary consequence after Adam's sin. On the day that you consume from it, you will surely die. The only way to purge a person from the noxious influence of Adam's sin is death. When Adam himself sinned, God said we have to banish him from the garden. Again, that's not a punishment. God explains, maybe he will extend his hand and eat from the other tree, from the tree of life, and live forever. So God banished Adam from the garden. Again, we read that as a punishment. God doesn't want him to eat from the tree of life. Why not? Let him eat from the tree of life. Let him live forever. Doesn't God want the best for us? God did not want Adam to eat from the tree of life for Adam's benefit, because he eats from the tree of life and then he cements his flaw forever. There's no way to reverse it. If Adam were to have eaten from the tree of life and to live forever, he will be permanently left with that flaw, with that defect. He won't have the possibility of rectification. He'll be fossilized with his flaw. And that's why, for Adam's benefit, he was banished from the garden. He was withheld from consuming from the tree of life in order that he should be able to achieve the full perfection, the full rectification, the full separation of good and evil, the full undoing, the full reversing of his sin. If someone never sins, they never do a sin, and even their mitzvahs are flawless, imagine there was such a thing, and you put the microscope and you find nothing flawed, they would still need to die. The Talmud tells us that there are 4 people who never sinned, but they still died as a result of the serpent, as a result of the sin of Adam. There's a great benefit of dying, because that will achieve the separation of good and evil. The benefit of dying is to restore the exclusivity of good that operated before Adam's sin. Now, most people, they themselves cause trouble to themselves because they bring evil upon themselves with their own sins. So they need to die for their own sins, because they brought impurity to themselves, and the only way to separate that, to remove that impurity, is with death. But there were 4 people who never sinned. So they have no personal contamination that they brought upon themselves. But because they emerged after Adam's sin, they still have the influence of Adam's sin within them. The original admixture of good and evil that happened as a result of Adam's sin is still within them. And therefore they need to die in order to achieve that separation, that cleansing. There will be a time where Adam's sin will be reversed. We'll have a Sinai-like revelation once again. We'll have a purging of evil once again. We'll have a slaughtering of the evil inclination, an elimination of all evil. And then God promises, we read this in Isaiah, of course, chapter 25, God will eliminate death forever. Man will be like man was before Adam's sin. There will be no need for the benefit of death. That was the sidebar. Fascinating. But he goes back to the original text of the book, and he goes back to this idea that man is the microcosm. There's a parallel within man of every part of the created universe. Man's the microcosm, the final creation in which all of Genesis was subsumed. Man's the microcosm to the universes, to the rest of the universes, macrocosm. And what you find in one, you'll find in the other. And with Adam's sin, man absorbed the venom of the serpent, and that created a mixture of good and bad within man, and consequently, concomitantly, it created a mixture of good and bad within the macrocosm, within the created existence. And whenever man changes his composition, the world's composition changes as well. So again, man is created in the image of God. Man has the ability to determine the fate of all of created existence. And it's not exactly like the soul influencing the body. It's like the macrocosm being influenced by the microcosm. Now he throws in another element to this structure. What are the means by which man can perfect the world? What are the means through which man can perfect himself? There's another thing that's a microcosm. There's another parallel between man and created existence. They are the mitzvos. Whatever exists within man exists within the world, within the created existence. Whatever exists within man exists within mitzvos. When a person fulfills a mitzvah, what are they doing? So the most unsophisticated definition of a mitzvah, it's a good deed. It's true, but that doesn't capture what the point of the mitzvah is. It's a way for them to perfect themselves. And all of the mitzvos are the way to perfect all of themselves. And here we learn that all of the mitzvos are there to perfect all of man and thereby all of created existence. Each mitzvah corresponds to a different part of man and correspondingly to a different part of created existence. And when a person fulfills one of the mitzvos, they are in effect elevating, refining, purifying, rectifying, uplifting one part of themselves. And consequently, in the macrocosm, the corresponding part of the created existence, they are rectifying with that mitzvah. They're elevating it. They're increasing light to it. And of course, not all mitzvahs are the same. Not all mitzvahs carry the same weight. Not all mitzvahs create the same degree of transformation. Depending on a person's refinement and purity and holiness and commitment and devotion during the performance of that mitzvah, that determines how much goodness and rectification and holiness and elevation are found in that mitzvah. And that will determine how much holiness and elevation and rectification will be directed towards the microcosm in the corresponding area of that mitzvah. And concomitantly, the level of the mitzvah will determine how much holiness, how much purity, how much refinement, how much elevation will be directed in the microcosm, in all the realms, in all the dimensions, in all of the universes, in all of created existence. When a person, via the mitzvos, brings purity and holiness upon themselves, they are bringing purity and holiness to all the realms. The microcosm, when it is elevated, it projects elevation to the macrocosm. And of course, the opposite is true as well. If a person violates the mitzvos in the area that the mitzvah corresponds to who they are, they, God forbid, are bringing impurity to themselves. They are defiling themselves, and they bring defilement to the corresponding dimension in the created existence. The mitzvos and their opposite, the good and the bad, they have a root, a foundation on high. With man's deeds below, they are awakening, empowering the corresponding parallel force on high. When a person fulfills all of the mitzvos with total perfection, with all their details, with all their precision, with purity, with holiness of thought, with devotion, they rectify themselves, the microcosm, and all the universes, all the systems, all the dimensions, all the realms, the macrocosm. That's what the verse is telling us. God created man. He blew into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became the soul of life. Vayihi ha'adam lenefesh chaya. Man is the soul of all of life, of all of created existence. Again, this could be misunderstood, we learned. The universe is the realms, the endless dimensions of created existence. They're not the body of a man. They're not the vehicle for the deeds of man. It's not a logical thing to say. Rather, just as the movement of the body is directed by the soul, so too the movement, the direction, the forces of the realms, the structures of all of the universes, the advancement and or regression, the building and or destruction of all these realms in the macrocosm, all of that is propelled by the actions of man below. Because man is a wondrous being, a microcosm of all of those systems and structures. Man's lofty soul, which is higher than all of these realms, incorporates within it all of these dimensions. Man has the keys to the kingdom. Man alone has the free will, the ability to propel himself and all of the worlds and all of the realms and all of created existence in whichever direction he chooses. Can bring elevation, can bring regression, can increase light, can obscure light, can build, can destroy, can rebuild after destruction, can repent. The book proceeds to give some analogies for this idea. The first analogy is a verse in Psalms 121. God is our shadow. A shadow always mirrors the thing that is creating the shadow. So if the person lifts his right arm, the shadow lifts its right arm, and so on. This is the analogy of how God effectuates the heavenly repercussions of man's deeds. Man does a deed. Man does a movement. Man does an action. And God is our shadow. He effectuates the macrocosmic consequence of our action. He says another analogy. When Moshe was offered to go save the Israelites by the burning bush, he asks God a question. If the Israelites ask me which name of God appeared to me, what shall I tell them? And God responded with a name that appears in only one context in the Torah. Eke is how we say it. Eke asher eke. What does this mean? What does this name of God connote? This name refers to God responding to us in exactly the way we treat him, as it were. Just as we are with him, he is to us. Whichever face we turn towards God, so to speak, he turns towards us with that same face, as it were, with that same countenance. So if I choose elevation, God will, in the exact same way, project the elevation to the macrocosm. This is how man is the soul of life. This is how man is the one who's created in the image of God. He gets to determine everything that happens in all of created existence. And this is the same idea of the cherubs. And that's going to be the next analogy that he's going to elaborate upon. The cherubs in the tabernacle, there were two of them, and they swiveled and they mirrored each other. And one represents us, and one represents God, as it were. And when we turn towards God, he turns towards us. We swivel away, he swivels away, as it were. He's going to elaborate upon that, please God, in our next session. We will study it. But this is a fascinating advancement of our studies in the book, in this wonderful book, Nefesh HaChaim. The first sentence of the book, man is the superpower. Man is created in the image of God. Man is the only one to determine what happens. What's the fate of all of created existence? Man has the soul of souls, the highest soul, the highest realm in all this interconnected existence. Man has the soul of life. And it's not exactly like a body and soul. It's a micro and macrocosm. Whatever we do gets projected to the macro. And mitzvahs are perfectly attuned to create this perfection. They too are a microcosm. They too correspond to a part within us and to a part within the upper realms. And along the way, we learned some fascinating insights about Adam's sin and how it changed him, and how previously he was a microcosm of only good, and how he was radically transformed as a result of his sin. And we're trying to undo that. And we had one successful stab at it at Sinai, and we regressed, and there's the benefit of death and so on. We are proceeding with Help Limadi in our study of this very foundational book to really explain to us what happens when we do a mitzvah and the great power that we unleash within ourselves and within the world at large. We are created in the image of God. We bear the soul of life, not just the soul of our own life, but the soul of all of created existence. We have tremendous power that we must be very careful in how we deploy it. Please God, we will continue in our study of this fascinating book. We have a lot to go. We're only like 7 chapters into the first section. There's a lot more to discuss. I'm looking forward, please God, some of your feedback and your questions and your comments to my email address, rabbiwolbe@gmail.com.